in on reinforcers versus punishers, a part of this Training 101 series. And I apologize, this first intro module is a lot of me talking, but it's really, really important for you to understand these concepts moving forward. So I appreciate you sticking with me here. So with that being said, we're gonna dive into a foundational concept of dog training, reinforcers, and punishers. So let's unpack these terms and better understand their implications so that you can be a better trainer for your dog. The first concept you're going to need to understand are the 4 quadrants. So ultimately, when we talk about the 4 quadrants, what you need to know is that the basis of whether a behavior will be strengthened, meaning more likely to occur in the future, or weakened, meaning less likely to occur in the future, can be categorized into these 4 quadrants. So like I said, reinforcement means the behavior is strengthened. Punishment means the behavior is weakened and less likely to occur. Now that's 2 things, but what makes it 4 quadrants? So there's positive and then there's negative. Now it's important when we talk about these concepts that positive doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. When we say positive, it means adding something, versus negative doesn't necessarily mean bad. It means removing a stimulus. Therefore, the 4 quadrants are positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. So let's first start with positive reinforcement. This means, if we refer back to what I just said, this means adding a stimulus to increase the likelihood of the behavior happening in the future. So the easiest example of this is giving your dog a treat when they sit. A human example would be your boss giving you a bonus for helping out the team at work. Now, negative reinforcement, if we think back to the definition, means removing something to increase the likelihood of that behavior happening in the future. So letting your dog out of the crate when they stop acting crazy. Or for humans, your car stops beeping at you when you put your seatbelt on. Now, I'm including these human examples just because I think it helps better drive the point home, just so you can think of it in your own life as well. And that'll help you remember it a little bit better. Okay, so next is positive punishment. Adding something to decrease the likelihood of a behavior happening. So an example would be screaming at your dog for jumping, or someone smacks you after you say something mean to them. Now, negative punishment means removing something to decrease the behavior. So removing freedom that your dog has by putting them into timeout until they stop barking, because we're trying to get them to stop barking or stop bugging the cat, right? For humans, that could be taking away your teenager's iPhone for failing on a test. Now, this sounds pretty straightforward until we talk about how this is all actually from the learner's perspective, which in this case, it's your dog's perspective. As our dog's trainer, which by taking this course, you're going to become your dog's dog trainer, it's important to understand that how you know something is being reinforced is if the behavior keeps happening. And you know something is being punished if the behavior is just stopping from occurring, or if it's getting weaker and weaker. The other piece that makes this a little bit more nuanced than just treats versus punishment is that just like people, not all dogs will find the same thing reinforcing or punishing, and not all reinforcers are always going to be reinforcing. So let me dive into this a little bit deeper. So let's say you ask your dog to come at the dog park, and then you leash them up and leave. For one dog, when you leash them up, this could be a big punishment. They were having so much fun at the dog park, they're playing with other dogs, and now you told them to come, and you put their leash on. So next time they're gonna be like, I don't wanna do that again, or I'm not sure if I wanna do that again, because last time you made me leave. But if you have another dog who maybe doesn't really like the dog park, or maybe they're tired because they've already been there for a long time, when you put the leash on, they could find that actually reinforcing. They get to rest, they get to leave a stressful place, and they might be happy to leave. So the same thing that you did to one dog could be perceived as a reinforcement. And on the other dog, it could be perceived as a punishment. Now, let's talk about treats, right? So not all dogs are going to find treats reinforcing in every situation. That being said, treats are called primary reinforcers, or just food in general is considered a primary reinforcer. Now, I also said the same reinforcer may not be reinforcing every time to the same dog. So what I mean by that is, I'm gonna use a human example first. So I love pizza and I love poutine. Poutine is a Canadian dish that is fries with cheese curds, very unhealthy, and it also has gravy. So anyway, I love poutine, but if I'm going on a job interview or if I have a big presentation that I'm really anxious about, I'm not going to want to eat that because my nervous system is going to, your nervous system, when you're scared, it doesn't matter if it's something that's actually life-threatening or not. It's going to make sure that it puts all its energy towards the thing that you're nervous about, which is really helpful when you're being chased by a lion. You shouldn't be worried about food. You should be worried about running away. But in our modern society, we're not being chased by a lion, but your body still responds in the same way. So if you're really anxious, you're not going to want to eat. The same with our dogs. Now, I also want to mention it's not always about anxiety, right? It could be something really, really exciting for our dogs. But another example, so let's say you're not scared of interviews or presentations, because I know some people aren't. So another even better example is, let's say you're enjoying your pizza on a fine evening and suddenly someone breaks into your house. Are you worried about eating pizza? No, you're worried about getting away, right? So like I said, poutine is very reinforcing to me. I love poutine. But if my life is in danger or if I'm anxious about something, I'm not going to want to eat it. Same thing with our dogs. Now, I'm going to use, it's harder to think of like a universal, exciting thing for everyone, but if you're a big fan of any musician or you've ever met a celebrity before that you're really excited to meet, that is an example of like excitement, right? Your body still gets nervous, or has the same physiological response to that. Or let's say you're going on a roller coaster, you're choosing to go on that, but you're still very excited. You're probably not going to want to eat a big meal before that. I also want to mention that we don't always realize what we're accidentally reinforcing. So let's say your dog is pawing at you for attention during a Zoom call and you say, stop, and you push him off. You may have just reinforced that behavior by accidentally giving them exactly what they wanted, which is attention, which brings me to my next point. Always looking at what the function of the behavior is. This is abbreviated. An amazing behaviorist named Dr. Susan Friedman came up with an analogy, WTF. What's the function? Function means why your dog is doing the behavior. What is the function of the behavior? This will help you better understand what your dog is seeking for reinforcement in that moment. So to further drive this point home, let's look at the behavior of barking. Dog 1 is barking at the mailman outside the window. The mailman leaves when he's done dropping off the mail. But from the dog's perspective, the mailman left because he barked. And it happens every time. And the dog wanted the mailman to leave the property, so the barking was reinforced, and the dog is not only going to continue to bark, but it's going to be a stronger behavior. Now, dog 2 is barking at you while you're cooking dinner. So you give him a small piece of your chicken. In this case, you also reinforce the dog for barking. Now, for both dogs on the outside, they're both barking, right? But the protocol of ignoring your dog isn't going to work for both because dog 1 is barking because they want the mailman to go away. And even if you ignore them, they still see the mailman leaving, right? And so they're being reinforced. Now, the dog that's barking at you for food, you can ignore them, and they probably will eventually stop barking as long as you are being very consistent with your ignoring, and there's no chance that they're gonna get food from you. And so over time, your dog should stop barking. Now, of course, there's more nuanced cases, but this is like a very generic overview to help you understand better. If you have a more nuanced case, also I want to remind you that you can always post in the Facebook group or ask during a call as well, because I'm happy to help answer some of those more nuanced cases. But as of right now, don't worry about that. Let's just talk about the generic concept of reinforcers versus punishment. Okay, so punishment is going to decrease the behavior. So why don't, certified force-free dog trainers use punishment then if it works? Well, the issue with punishment is that there's always a risk. So we don't want to make it our first go-to. And while it may seem quicker to correct the unwanted behavior by yelling or saying no, it can often come with risks. So oftentimes when we say no to our dog, first of all, it's not really a strong enough punisher. It's actually an interrupter. So it's interrupting your dog in the moment, but it's not necessarily punishing enough for them to stop that behavior, right? Also, punishment can lead to side effects like increased aggression because they pair you yelling with the trigger. So if they're scared of the mailman and you start yelling, they might think, oh my God, the mailman is really scary because not only are they coming to our house every day, they're also making my human go insane as well. And it can cause more anxiety and fear. Now, this isn't always the case. For some dogs, it could possibly work, but I'm talking about in general. This is a side effect that can happen. And there are safer and more effective ways to build that long-lasting behavior change. So it's not really worth it, right? So let's look at the example of spraying your dog for barking at the mailman. Like I said, they might stop in the moment, but the next time they're gonna be more anxious and they might bark even more or create other issues. I also want to mention too, just from a human example, and this isn't really like a realistic example in the modern world, but let's say you were scared of public speaking and you stutter sometimes due to your nerves. If every time you stuttered and someone shocked you for stuttering, you might just stop talking or say as little as possible, talk slower so that you don't stutter, right? Now, on the outside, someone may say, look, shocking them worked. They're not stuttering anymore. But on the inside, you're more nervous now. So you might start picking at your skin, biting your nails, or just have that increased cortisol in your body, which is not good for your body over time. So that's where we have to look at punishment and say, ideally, we are not going there at all. We are just going on the reinforcing side. And so that's what we mean when we say punishment has those side effects. Now, I also want to mention that a lot of times, if we look at the function of any behavior, we can also see, what needs aren't being met. So if your dog is chewing on the wood part of a piece of furniture, instead of punishing the chewing, what I recommend is reinforcing your dog to chew on a wood toy that's similar to the texture of your couch, and then blocking off that area so that they can't have access to it, at least temporarily. And what's interesting is, even though this seems really counterintuitive, by just having your dog chew on that piece of wood that is appropriate, they're being reinforced for it because they're enjoying their time. And the more that they chew on that new piece of wood, they're gonna be less likely to chew on the wooden furniture. Now, if you're making a big deal because you forgot to block off the furniture, they might still go for the furniture because it gets them attention as well. So that's where it's really important to block off that area so that they no longer can even chew on the furniture in the first place. Okay, so to wrap up, let's quickly recap. 1 is understanding the difference between reinforcers versus punishers. And 2 is always viewing things from the dog's perspective. 3, we want to avoid punishing as much as we can because there are side effects, and we want to prioritize reinforcing the good behaviors over punishing bad behaviors. 4, if a behavior keeps happening, that means it is being reinforced. If a behavior is weakening, it is somehow being punished. And we always want to be observant and adapt to what the function of a behavior is. All right, that's it, and I will see you in the next lesson.